How's it going, everybody? Hope you're having a blessed day, and if not, I hope it becomes that way. This video we're going to be making a recurve jig for reflexing the tips on a bow to make a recurve bow. And I've got 3 rectangles of plywood cut out here. They're 13 inches long and 8 wide. Now this is pretty thin plywood. If you've got like 3/4 inch plywood, you could just use 2 sheets. But I'm going to laminate 3 of these together.
You could skip this step in the process and just use a chunk of 2x8 or 2x10 as well, but I don't have any chunks of that laying around, so might as well use up some of these scraps of plywood. A piece of cardboard works real good for buttering this glue around on sheets like this, and make sure you get good even coverage on all the sides that are being glued together. I like to clean up the edges of all my gluing while it's wet with a wet wipe or a damp cloth. It's just a lot easier, in my opinion, to clean it up now with a damp cloth than it is to sand or scrape or cut it off the next day.
We got those pieces of plywood clamped together. I'm going to let them glue up overnight. And in the meantime, let's work on a bow that we can stick into that form and bend the tips on. This is a 60-inch piece of lumber. It's got 1/2 inch wide tips, and it's 1 1/8 inches at the handle section. And I'm just going to run an even taper all the way down the limbs. Let's get after it. Alright, it's the next day. We've got our piece of wood laminated together. Again, it's 8 inches by 13 inches. Let's go ahead and mark 2.5 inches on the bottom corner. Okay, now I got a pencil tied to a piece of string. Measure out the width of my board with my string here so that my pencil just is on the edge of it. And I'm going to hold my string right here at my 2.5 inch mark. And then I'm just going to scribe a line. Now if you want super deep, long recurves, you can go way down here. I'm going to actually end up cutting these somewhere right in here, but that's up to you. And then from here, I'm just gonna measure about 3/4 of an inch from my line and where I want my recurves to stop. And then you just wanna scribe a line parallel to your curve. And if you wanted to, you could go back and do this number and get it just perfect, but it doesn't really matter. But you go like this and scribe this line. All right, the first line that you scribed, so we'll go ahead and do 2.5. And I'm gonna scribe this line as well. Okay, and we're gonna mark 2.5 inches to that line. And we're going to connect this 2.5 inch mark to this 2.5 inch mark. I want these recurves about 3 3/4 of an inch from what's going to be the back of the bow. So it'll recurve them 3 3/4 of an inch forward. Go ahead and make a mark across both those scribed lines. And then you only need 1.5 inches or so of this scribed line. So I'm going to measure 2.5 out from this outer scribed line. So I want to keep all this. And I'm going to cut off this, and that. So now I'm going to cut all this out and cut out this spot here so you have somewhere to clamp your bow tube. You'll end up boiling these tips and then sticking your limb in this notch, and this will keep your tip from coming out on you. And then you'll just bend it around this scribed line, and this will hold your tip in place. Okay, let's cut this out with a jigsaw. If you don't have a jigsaw, maybe you could use a coping saw or a drywall saw, but highly recommend investing in one of these right here. Now you want to make sure that this is pretty level this way, otherwise you'll introduce a limb twist into your limbs. I'm just improving this transition from the curve to where my pieces of plywood are still flat.
If the transition from the curve to the flat side of the board isn't real nice, it might cause your limb to crack.
And one of these jigsaws almost always cuts on the bottom side of the cut a little bit out. So just make sure that you're good and flat and even across there. You don't want one side deeper than the other.
There's a couple of reasons I like this design. First being you can just stick your bow straight into the form and it'll hold the tip for you as you're bending it rather than monkeying around with trying to get your first clamp on the tip of the form. Then you can clamp any spot in that limb along the curve if it's not bending quite tight enough to the curve like you want it.
All right, you can skip this step, or you can take a strip of leather and glue it to this side of your form, which is going to be the back. After boiling these limb tips, that wood gets pretty soft, and I've had on a previous form some dents created on the back of the bow from a little bit of roughness in this edge here where I'd clamped it down, and it created some little dimples in the back of the bow. So I'm gonna go ahead and glue this piece of leather on the back here just to ensure that that doesn't happen. Rough this bugger up a little bit. This is just a strip of veg tan leather. Measure out how long it needs to be. Cut it off right there.
Go. Once you get your leather glued on there, the time it takes for your water to boil and then your limb to boil, you're already ready to take your tape off, and you can go ahead and stick your bow into your form, and it'll allow that glue to finish curing underneath the bow as it's clamped down. Here's what you're left with. close to 4 inches of reflex in this bow's tips, and that'll make for a sweet static recurve. Well, I hope you got something out of this. Now go build a bow. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.